thewellnesscouch.com, streaming wellness into your lives. Download the app today.
This is Up for a Chat with your hosts, Cyndi O'Meara and Kim Morrison.
Here we are, up for a chat about the hottest topics that are important to you, inspiring you to awaken the change within. I'm Cyndi O'Meara.
And I'm Kim Morrison. This week we have an exceptional guest on the show, someone who we've both followed for quite some time. We've had the privilege and honor to speak on the same stage as this amazing human. He's affectionately known as one of Australia's leading integrative health practitioners, health coaches, educators, podcasters, and author with over 45 years of clinical experience. Welcome to Up for a Chat with gorgeous Dr. Ron Ehrlich.
Wow, what an introduction. I really want to meet this guy. He sounds so impressive. Thanks, guys. It's so good to be talking to you again. And so good you've got, well, Up for a Chat is back.
Yeah,
Well,
we're
pretty proud of it.
Yeah.
Good on you. So you should be.
Yeah. Ron, we have not, probably spoken to you in quite some time. And some people might not know exactly, who you are and what you've done in your life. And 45 years of clinical experience is up there with the best. There's not many that have 45 years of clinical experience. Can you give us a brief on what you did do and what you are doing now?
Yeah, sure. Wow. Yeah, I know 45 years. I started really, really young. But anyway, that's another
Very
story.
young, like 2 years of age.
Anyway. No, but look, I started as a dentist and I've been working as a dentist, a holistic dentist. And very early on in my career, like literally within the first 6 months or 12 months, I had this epiphany through various patients that the body and the mouth were connected. And that was quite a breakthrough. I mean, it wasn't how I was taught because dentistry is so finicky. It's so easy to get lost in the mouth, so it's sometimes easy to forget that there's a whole person attached to it. And so I really got into holistic dentistry very early on, within the first year or two. And people always ask, what's that? And I just say, look, it really is about how the mouth is connected to the rest of your body and the impact that has, like I realize it's the beginning of the digestive tract. It's the beginning of the respiratory tract. It's the site of the two most common infections known to man, woman, and child, tooth decay and gum disease. It's involved in headaches, neck aches, posture, sleep, breathe, nourish. The whole thing. So, it opened up a whole world of healthcare, which I explored from that moment on. And I developed this in about 1983, I started to work with this model of health, which said, on the one hand, there are these stressors which affect our lives. And that was a combination of emotional, environmental, postural, nutritional, and dental stress. And on the other hand, you want to build resilience by focusing on sleep, breathe, nourish, move, and think. And that really was the framework for me exploring healthcare from that point on. And actually, the more you learn, the more you realize you don't know. And that led me into a fellowship in nutritional environmental medicine with ACNEM. I was actually the president of ACNEM for a couple of years. And also a fellowship in lifestyle medicine, and it led me into sleeping and breathing assessment, executive coaching. I've written a book. I've done over 600 podcasts. And now I'm starting to get my head around healthcare.
Yeah, I love it.
So that's where I'm at. And actually, I've moved from clinical practice into a whole new career because after COVID, I think we all had a bit of a wake-up call that community was really important and a community that shared healthcare values was important. And so what I'm really passionate about is building that community and taking it to individuals and the workplace, because I think the workplace is a really good place to focus on health and well-being. That's where I'm at. That's where I've been. And that's where I'm going.
Well, I'd like to take you back to 1983, and then we're going to work our way through this.
Okay.
Really, seriously, 1983, nobody, well, I shouldn't say nobody, but you were a pioneer, because I remember 1983, I was just finishing off my degree in nutrition, which I didn't agree with, but anyway, that doesn't matter. But you were actually a pioneer. Was there a impetus that created that in that first year of you being out of university and realizing that the mouth was connected to the rest of the body? What happened? How did you get that in 1 year? Because most people don't get it in their lifetime of looking at a mouth in dentistry.
Yeah, look, it wasn't in 1 year, because I graduated in 1978. So in 1979, I really got the idea that the way the jaw fits together could affect someone's headaches and neck aches and jaw pain. So I got into it through chronic musculoskeletal pain. I found myself, rather surprisingly, treating people with headaches by addressing the way their teeth fitted together and whether they clenched or grind their teeth. And so I thought, wow, this is amazing. The mouth is the center of everything. And I explored that approach, the dental stress approach, for about 3 or 4 years. And then I was doing courses all over the place, in UK, in the US, in Europe. And I had attended a program by a chiropractor in the US who gave me that model, who understood that the jaw was connected, but he said, it's not the only stressor. And let me just define what a stressor is. A stressor is anything that promotes chronic inflammation and reduces immune function. Now, as soon as you define a stressor as that, then you start to understand how everything can impact on every disease, because all diseases, physical and actually mental, are now being seen as an inflammatory disease. So he said, no, it's not just dental stress, it's emotional stress, it's environmental stress, which was a real thing in 1983. Not many people were talking about that. Nutritional stress and postural stress. And so I gave to my study group, I gave my first talk on nutritional stress, and that introduced me to ACNEM, the Australasian College of Nutritional and Environmental Medicine. Oh my God, there was a whole ball game. In 1983, and I was still, I guess, do the maths, I think I was about 28 then, I didn't feel comfortable about talking about emotional stress. So I kind of restricted myself to nutritional, environmental, postural, and dental stress. And as then of course it is 5 stressors. Emotional is a huge part of that problem. So it really came about through treating chronic musculoskeletal pain. And I had patients that would come in and go, you know what, as soon as I got off dairy, I stopped having headaches. And yet they had a really crappy bite and they were clenching and grinding their teeth. And that's what prompted me to realize that nutrition was really important. And I had other patients that came in and said, yeah, look, I started to meditate and that really was a breakthrough for me. And they had really crappy teeth and were clenching and grinding their teeth. And that was the breakthrough. And so, when you're confronted by all these different things, you could get all defensive and go, oh, that's bullshit. No, that doesn't make sense. But if you've got an open mind, you kind of go, wow, so that's another piece of the puzzle. Wow, that's another piece of the puzzle. And that still goes on to this very day. It's why I love doing podcasts, because like you, I get to talk to people who know more about things than I do. I ask them questions and they answer them and I learn, and I just keep putting pieces of the puzzle together. So it really came about in 1983 through chronic musculoskeletal pain. Look, yes, it was good that I had an open mind and put it together, but there have been so many people before me that have put this together in their own way. And I've just been privileged to listen to them and have an open mind about it.
Yeah. Hey, who was that chiropractor that you were talking about?
It was a guy called George Goodhart.
Goodhart. Okay. I just find it fascinating how chiropractic seems to infiltrate many professions because they think differently. They don't think mechanistically. They're not taught that philosophy of mechanism. They're taught the philosophy of vitalism. And so I find it fascinating how here you are, you went to, obviously, it was a chiropractic conference maybe, I don't know. And then you learn about, I guess, the TMJ. I guess that's what he was talking about. Would I be right?
Mm-hmm. Yep. And actually, a really big statement, and that is when you look at the spine, and he was looking at the spine, he said there's a tripodization in every vertebrae through the body except C1, the first vertebrae, and the thing that tripodizes the first vertebrae is the jaw. That's a huge statement. That's incredible. Yeah. Because there's a lot of chiropractors that say, they're called hole-in-one, if you can stabilize the first cervical vertebrae, then you can stabilize the spine. And I thought, that's a big statement. How does that work? And then he said that, and I thought, now that's starting to make a bit more sense to me. But anyway, look, chiropractors are really, not every chiropractor, because a lot of chiropractors think they can solve every problem in the body on their own. And I don't believe that's true of anybody. But I think there are some amazing chiropractors that have made connections. In fact, a chiropractor that I worked with in 1985 said to me, and at that time I was still using mercury amalgam, and he said, Ron, you've got to stop using this stuff. And I said, no, it's locked in. Mercury's locked in. It doesn't escape, because that's what we were taught at uni. And he said, no, Ron, you're reading the wrong journals. Read the environmental journals. Read this journal. So I did. And I thought, wow, maybe. And I sent off a couple of samples of mercury to have them analysed. And sure enough, there was a lot less mercury in the sample that had come from a patient's mouth than I knew the manufacturer had said was there when it started. So that changed my whole view on filling materials from a chiropractor. It's really, I really love working and listening to other health professionals and just putting it all together.
So let's talk about the mercury. I remember my dentist's name that I had, as a teenager, and you'd have a little bit of a shadow and they'd dig your whole tooth out and fill it with mercury, because that was what it was. This is the 70s. I remember as a teenager, Joe Pierce was his name in Bendigo, but that's what they did. And now everybody's yanking all the mercury out and everybody's just got shells in their teeth. So how do we make such mistakes in our professions? And everybody makes it. Like, look at nutrition. Nutrition has been one big balls up after another. Low fat, cornflakes or breakfast cereals, margarine, vegetable oils. It's just we do so many balls up. Is there a type of philosophy or understanding that we can be guided by to not make these mistakes? Because we're probably making mistakes now. Like, I've heard the new things that they're using in dentistry is like plastics. And so now we're putting in endocrine disruptors into our system. Like, please, can you go through this? How can we make it better that we're not going to make these mistakes that we've made in the past?
Yeah, look, you have to see it in a historical perspective. In the first part of the 20th century, right up until the 60s, really, decay was rampant. Like, really, it was rampant, and it was a big problem. And you needed to do something quickly and cheaply, and that you could roll out to a population. And mercury amalgam fillings was it, and it was taught as so there was a big problem, and that needed to have a solution. Because as soon as you have decay in a tooth and you scoop out that decay, you've got a defect, a hole, which food would get caught in and decay would get worse. So you've got to fill it. That's what a filling is.
Yeah.
You couldn't have composites then because they weren't going to last long enough. So gold was the gold standard, but not everybody could afford gold. And we were taught at university it was locked in. So it's not, and it wasn't, and it isn't, and it doesn't. So there's that. And now we found ourselves in 2023, and we use either ceramics. We can still use gold, not very often. And we can use composites, and composites have some BPA, which escapes in the first 24 or so hours. Look, I'm not going to tell you that it's perfect. The perfect filling material is tooth enamel, is natural tooth. Everything else is a compromise, everything else. And you have to work out how much of a compromise you make. So that's the thing there. How do we make mistakes? Oh, look, I'm with you on nutrition. And if the last 3 years, we don't want to go too far down this rabbit hole, but, the last 3 years is any indication of making mistakes, in my opinion, that was a continuation of. In fact, I've been aware of mistakes being made in healthcare for the last 40 or so years. And having been aware of that, and having been aware of the role of industry in public health, I've been aware of that for 30 or 40 years. I've written about it in my book, but even I was shocked about the last 3 years. So this is still going on to this very day. We love simple solutions. We love to reduce things down. It's called reductionism. Give me a symptom and I'll find you a drug or a supplement to cure that problem. And we love to have simple solutions to complex problems. And so, the word holistic has been bandied around and misused, but it just happens to be the way the body works and the way the planet works. And it doesn't always lend itself to simple one symptom, one thing solutions. So that's part of the problem, really. We love simple solutions. Industry is very quick to provide us with those solutions. It's why our healthcare system, I put healthcare in inverted commas here, our health management system is a great economic model generating literally trillions of dollars. I mean, the pharmaceutical industry is a $1.5 trillion a year industry. The healthcare industry is a hundreds of billions of dollars industry. The problem is it's a great economic model. It's just not a very good health model. So, that's how we get into these messes. And I think it's often people who find themselves in a crisis that decide to look more holistically, and then they're on their own journey. So, everyone's on a different journey. That's both practitioner and patient alike.
Yeah. And that's the thing, is that when someone's in a crisis, then they'll make change in their life. But before that crisis happens, sometimes they don't. There are proactive people, of course, but I always find that I've had people call me, families that are just in a complete health crisis or sickness crisis because of the last 3 years and because of what they were mandated to do. And they just don't know what to do. They don't know. And I'm seeing a lot of people coming up with solutions to their problems, but it's a really tough time. It's a really tough time at this point. What's the name of your book? I don't know if I knew this, Ron.
Oh, guys, I have to send you both a copy of my book. Yes. It's called A Life Less Stressed, The 5 Pillars of Health and Wellness. And I always say, look, that is not autobiographical. It's aspirational for me as much as anybody. And it's a book in 3 parts. The first part is the role of the chemical and pharmaceutical and food industry on healthcare. The second part is, and at the end of that first part, you could either throw your hands up and go, oh, what the hell? What's the point? But the point is you've got to take control of your own health. So that's the second part. The second part is identify and minimize as many stressors that compromise your immune system and promote chronic inflammation as you can. And then once you've done that, third part of the book is to build resilience and to focus on sleep and breathe as foundational, nourish, movement and thought as other pillars. And that was published in 2018. And, the problem with doing a book is that once it's written, it's written. And of course, I've moved on since then and realized that there's a whole area of quantum biology that is even more fundamental than sleep and breathe. But that's a whole other story. So the book is a Life Less Stress, the 5 Pillars of Health and Wellness.
Well, I love it. Before I ask you the next question, those 5 pillars, I've heard you say, is it emotional, chemical, nutritional, physical? What's the...
No, the 5 stressors.
Yeah.
The 5 stressors compromising immune function and promoting chronic inflammation are emotional.
Yep.
Stress or environment, because thoughts are things. And those things are called neurotransmitters that either promote inflammation or promote well-being. They attach onto cell membranes and cause our genes to express themselves either in a good way or a bad way. That's why emotional stress is important. Environmental stress, we're exposed to thousands of chemicals, tens of thousands, and not to mention EMF radiation, so there's that. Nutritional stress, well, I don't have to tell you guys about nutritional stress. The food pyramid and the Australian Healthy Eating Guidelines are 2 examples of nutritional stress. Okay, so we could talk for hours about that. Postural stress, that's a huge one. Putting our head on our spine has been a major challenge, and head forward posture, which is affected by breathing, a whole range of work and our technology. That's that. And dental stress is, of course, what we've just talked about. So they're the 5 stressors, but the 5 pillars to build resilience are sleep, breathe, nourish, movement, not exercise. I don't want to freak anybody out, just movement, and thought, how we think. These are how we build resilience. So that's kind of the balancing beam, if you like. Identify and minimize stress on the one hand, or stressors on the one hand, and build resilience on the other hand, and realize that the entire balancing beam pivots on our genes, but we are not a victim of our genes. It's how our genes express themselves, called epigenetics, which is this wonderful, new, empowering science of how genes express themselves, and we've got a lot of control over that.
Ron, I'm wondering, sorry,
Kimmy.
No, I keep having this image when I hear this about genes, and I just remember so distinctly you speaking on stage, and you put up a picture, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but it was of primitive Aboriginal mouths and the incredible arch that was displayed based on how they lived. And obviously, I think you called it the dental arch from memory, but it was this amazing arch, and tooth decay was just unknown. And yet the introduction of white man or white man's food has become a hugely significant problem, not only for our Indigenous people, but also, of course, the modern person. Do you mind if now you're saying genes, it's an epigenetic, it's an expression of whether we turn the genes on or off. Is that because of the food? And if so, how has this impacted us? And is there an answer to take us back to those beautiful arches? Most people, when you ask the question in that workshop, who's ever had dental work or had things, I think in a room of 600 or 700 people, I'd say 98% of us put our hand up. I hope I'm not exaggerating. Could you explain that whole scenario?
Yeah, that is great. That's a great question. Look,
see, she always gets that.
yeah. See, Cyndi, I had to throw that in, but no, that is a great question. Look, I said tooth decay was rampant; it was epidemic, and there was this dentist in the early part of the 20th century called Weston A. Price, who wanted to find out what caused tooth decay. So he went and visited all different cultures around the world, ancestral villages where people were still on their ancestral diets. And what he found surprised him. He found even more than he ever imagined he would find. he realised that all of these cultures, and he went to indigenous cultures in Australia, to Polynesia, to the Andes, to Alaska, to Switzerland, to Africa, to the New Hebrides, in Scotland, and they were all on different diets. But what they all had in common was they were on a nutrient-dense diet. And what was interesting, and none of them had tooth decay. Not only did they not have tooth decay, but they also had enough room for all 32 of their teeth that we have all evolved to have. Now, in the same way we've got evolved to have 5 fingers on each hand, 5 toes on each foot, we've evolved to have 32 teeth in our mouth. And what is the significance of that? If you've got enough room for all 32 of the teeth in your mouth, you've got enough room for your tongue in your mouth. You've got enough room, you've got a better upper airway. That means nasal passages, sinuses, pharyngeal space. That's upper respiratory system. So a narrow, crowded mouth means you've got a narrow, crowded upper airway, and that has implications on how you sleep and breathe. So he found that these cultures all had this robust health, and also they didn't have any cancer, cardiovascular disease, or diabetes. So he found much more than he thought he would. And what was interesting was he went down the road out of these isolated villages to the nearest towns, and all of these people had the same genetic background as the people he'd visited in these remote villages. And guess what? These people had rampant tooth decay. They had cardiovascular disease, cancer, diabetes. And within one generation, this same genetic group had narrow jaws and crowded teeth. So this was these people's genes expressing themselves within one generation because of a nutrient-poor diet. So what was the common denominator? And all these people were eating, in the remote villages, were eating different kinds of foods. In the Eskimos, they were eating mainly fat and protein, very little vegetables. In the Hebrides, they were eating oatcakes and some seafood. All over the place, they were eating different things. And what he found was there were 3 or 4 common denominators. All of these ancestral diets had 4 times the amount of 10 times the amount of water-soluble vitamins and minerals. That means B and calcium, the B complex and calcium and zinc and magnesium. 4 times the amount of water-soluble vitamins and minerals than the towns which he visited in the 1920s and 30s. 10 times the water-soluble vitamins, 4 times the fat-soluble vitamins. Fat-soluble vitamins are A, D, E, and K, and you need fat-soluble vitamins to absorb the water-soluble minerals. And then all of these fat-soluble vitamins came from animals that have been grown on natural, healthy pastures. So these were really important findings. And if you translate that into today, it's a function of poor nutrition from preconception through to conception, through to in utero, through to infancy and childhood, adolescence, etc. We have a nutrient-poor diet, and then you factor in all the environmental problems and stressors and allergens and chemicals, and you've got the perfect storm for an epidemic in preventable chronic degenerative diseases like cardiovascular disease, still the biggest killer, cancer, second, autoimmune conditions. There are now over 100 autoimmune conditions. That's the body attacking itself, diabetes, obesity, mental health. These are all preventable chronic degenerative diseases. And it's a function of poor nutrition and environmental stressors, and then you factor in emotional stress into it as well, and you've got the perfect storm. A great economic model, just not a very good health model.
And that's the sad thing, is that it is a great business model. All these people sick, and we find a solution. You know, like you said, you've got a complicated problem, you find a simple solution to it, which might be a medication. And the fact that Weston A. Price, that book is well known. It's talked about in many circles around the world. Yet our governments just don't seem to see the common sense in it, do they? And that's what's frustrating, Ron. It's just I just don't understand how people can't see this. And you're one of there's a lot of dentists out there, and I don't know if they see this connect. And there are a lot of nutritionists versus dietitians out there, and I'm not sure whether those guys are seeing this disconnect that we have. It's frustrating. Like every time I speak to somebody, I hear the same thing, really. But it's just there's no one in our government that is creating a solution. It seems to be individuals like you that are getting the word out. But it's, you said the dietary guidelines, and the healthy plate is the stressor in our life. Yet nobody seems to be seeing this in our government officials and in our Medicare system and even in our medical fraternity. There are some medical doctors out there that are definitely changing, but for the most part, I don't see this happening. Do you think we're going to see a turnaround?
Look, there was this famous thing called the tobacco playbook. I don't know whether you're familiar with it, but the tobacco playbook, it was known in the 1940s that tobacco, and certainly by the 1950s, it was certainly known that A, tobacco was addictive, and B, that it caused health problems. And that was a really well-known fact scientifically. But industry had an influence, and it engaged enough academic people to be able to say, you know what, the science is really not clear on this. It's very confusing. It's very conflicted. Yes, look, there's some articles which say it is addictive, but there are others which say it's not. So we really can't say for sure. And there are others that say it causes health issues, but there are others that say it's not. That was called the tobacco playbook. And the tobacco playbook was so successful that it wasn't really, now remember, we knew it was for sure addictive and bad for your health in the 1950s, but there was enough doubt sown in to keep that uncertainty, in inverted commas, going for another 50 years. It wasn't until the 1990s that really things started to happen. And then in 2006, US Congress officially declared tobacco as addictive. So the tobacco playbook has been used for supplements, for example. There's no evidence to show that vitamin D is effective or that vitamin C has any role to play. There's no evidence. It's very conflicted, expensive urine. We really don't know. And God help us if something as simple as taking a supplement like vitamin D or vitamin C or getting out in the sun was good for your health, because there's no money in that. So we may as well use the tobacco playbook in other ways as well. One could argue about whether fat was good or bad. We still see it to this day. You will see low fat recommended. You go onto the American USDA site and healthcare advice for healthcare professionals. Just you can Google it and put in your own weight and height and age, and out will come a recommendation for low fat, avoid cholesterol, keep carbohydrates at around 300 to 400 grams a day. And there it is in 2023, advice that has been going on for the last 30 or 40 or 50 years. The tobacco playbook is used. You could say the sugar playbook, the fat playbook, the EMF playbook, the environmental toxins playbook. It's being rolled out by industry, and it's a very successful way of doing it. If you are expecting, this was one of my mentors is a guy called Alan Savory, who is very into holistic land management. And I realized there was a lot of similarities between what he is talking about in holistic management, in land care, but also in healthcare. And he said, if you are expecting the change to come from above, and he wasn't talking about God here, he was talking about governments or organizations like the NHMRC, the CDC in America, the NIH, the AMA. If you're expecting the change to come from above, you're going to be waiting a very long time because they are very slow to take up new evidence. There is a lot of self-interest and ego involved, and they lack common sense. The change has to come from the ground up, and that's why building communities that have got like-minded and open-minded, and I think that's really important. I don't like dogma. I like karma. My favourite bumper sticker is "My karma ran over your dogma." So I like good karma and an open mind. I think thank God we have a great modern medical system. I've been the beneficiaries of that, and my family has many times. I am eternally grateful to it. When it comes to crisis therapy, there is no better place to be than in Western medicine. Thank God for that. The problem is when it comes to chronic diseases, we do a very poor job. And that's where the economic model takes over from the health model. So the change has to come from the ground up. I'm not optimistic. Look, perhaps, but there's just too much vested interest. And I was optimistic before the pandemic about potential for governments to change, but the pandemic was an example of industry influence turbocharged beyond anyone's wildest imagination. That just took it to another level. I mean, in 1961, Eisenhower talked about the industrial military complex exerting undue influence on every aspect of life, but I think we could add to the military industrial complex, that's what he said, in military industrial complex, we could add the food, pharmaceutical and media complex to that, and we have a perfect storm. 2023, where we find ourselves now.
I couldn't agree more. You talk about coming from a grassroots level. And one of the things you said in the beginning, and when I went back to 1983, but you said now that is what you are doing. Could you explain to us how you are building communities for health? What is your new thing that you're doing now? I'd love to know.
Yeah, well, I think one of the things I loved in my clinical work was patient contact. I love the one-on-one connection with patients. But, I kind of have taken a new direction, because I feel like I've still got a long way to go in my career. And what I want to do is build community. And I'm doing that. I have had a podcast now I've done 10 years of podcasting. For the last 500 or 600 or 500 episodes or 400 episodes have been with a thing called Unstress with Dr. Ron Ehrlich. And I did that it was a bit self-indulgent, really. Like I said, I get to ask people questions and they answer them and I learn. And I hope my listeners do too. But after the pandemic, I decided to stop clinical practice and just focus on building a community around unstressed health. And it's a community for individuals. But what's happened in the workplace is a really interesting opportunity. And I think there's a confluence of interest in the workplace which doesn't exist in healthcare. And that may sound paradoxical, but workplace wellbeing is now mandated. The governments in the east coast of Australia have followed, have put legislation in place which says organisations now must, by law, minimise and mitigate psychosocial risk of their employees. And since October 2022, some companies have been fined significant amounts of money, and so have individuals within those companies, ranging from board members, CEOs, HR, poor managers, have been fined as well. And so it's now workplace well-being is not a nice to have, it's a must have. And one could argue that the workplace has been handed a bit of a hospital pass. You know what a hospital pass means in rugby or in football? It's like if you've just been thrown a ball and this group of footballers is about to tackle you and really cream you, you pass the ball to the person next to you so they get creamed and you don't. That's called a hospital pass. Mm-hmm. Well, in a way, the government has handed the business community a hospital pass because our healthcare, our mental health is really in a bad way, particularly post-pandemic. It was before, but it's even worse post-pandemic. So business has been handed a tough assignment. But here's the thing. It's an incredible opportunity because in business, good health not only makes sense, but it makes dollars. There's a confluence of interest. And in fact, Deloitte did a study in the UK just late last year, which showed that for every pound or dollar a business spends on workplace well-being, they get a £5 or $1.60 return. So not only is there a great return on investment financially, not only do they comply with legislation, but they also improve the health of themselves as executives, but also the workforce and hopefully the families that they work with. So I've become really passionate about, having tried through healthcare for many years to have an impact. I'm really excited about workplace well-being because it offers such a great opportunity, and it really is, a wonderful opportunity to reach a lot of people. So we're doing it through my podcast, just with whoever's listening and building. I've never taken my podcast very seriously, and by seriously I mean marketing it in any particular way. That's about to change, and entering the world of workplace well-being. And I've gathered together some amazing people, and we can talk about this after the podcast too, guys. But I've gathered together an amazing group of health practitioners who are like-minded, who want to make a difference and who've got much more knowledge than I do about their particular subject. And I'm just putting together that to help change the world, transform global health. Why not?
I love it.
Brilliant. Oh. I want to know, from your perspective then, Ron, and understanding, and I'm just going to bring this back to where it all began for you. You made a comment that went something like, are you bringing in then into that and really getting them to think about dentistry? Because as far as I'm concerned, growing up, we went to the murder house. The dentist was called the murder house. We came out with little cotton things in our mouths and we got attacked, and you kind of felt violated from a very, very young age. Yet we've grown up with that belief, and yet you're saying our health actually begins in our mouth. Is that what you're taking into the workplace well-being as well? I know it's bigger than that, but is that a starting point for someone like you?
Actually, no, it's not. There's two things to be said there. Well, firstly, in the workplace, no. I'm taking a very holistic view of this. What I'm trying to do, and this is very different from a patient-practitioner relationship. This is about people getting to understand why they need to change the way they think about healthcare. What are the challenges that people face on a daily basis in the workplace? What is the mindset with which they approach those challenges? Is it a growth mindset? Is it a threat mindset? That makes a big difference. And how do they focus on a daily basis on recovery? Now, that's really the key. So that sounds very different, doesn't it, from the 5-stress or 5-pillar model? But that's essentially what we're doing. We're looking at daily challenges, and this is whether you're in the workplace or you're in domestic work, at home, building a family. It doesn't matter who you are. I call myself now an executive coach, health coach, but I consider everybody every individual to be the executive of their own life, the CEO of their own life. So to me, when I call myself an executive health coach, I do that with CEOs of companies, but I do that with, mothers and fathers who are at home looking after kids. They are the executives of their lives. So to me, it's an all-encompassing term. So that's how I approach.
Can I just interrupt you there, though? Because,
Sure.
and I'm just saying this with absolute love, someone like you or Cyndi, who has an academic background and has qualifications and things like that, I'm just curious how a workplace well-being would be seeing that someone like you, and I say this with love because I mean it, but you're a dentist. You're not a health expert. And I've seen so many people question people's qualifications, yet you know more about health and well-being because of your dentistry work. So I'm just curious how you're accepted as an executive health coach when you are a dentist. How do you cross that bridge with these people that already have stigma around who you are? For instance, for me, growing up going to the murder house.
Look, very briefly, and this, as I said, is only just the beginning of my journey in this world. We've been working with companies that might have 30 or 40 employees and never had an HR in their entire 20 or 30-year working life, human resources. And we've also worked with one of the biggest hotel groups in the world and delivered a pilot program to their senior leadership team. So I'm pretty confident of bridging that gap. I'm not marketing come and let's talk to a dentist. I've got a fellowship in nutritional and environmental medicine and lifestyle medicine. I'm an executive. I have actually done an executive coaching qualification. I'm a sleep and breathing, integrative breathing instructor, so there's a whole range of things.
You just won them over with all of that.
Yeah. So
you completely knocked them off their perch.
Yeah. But listen, the one thing I do want to say about dentistry, I want to put a word in here for dentistry. Dentistry is a very, very intense and challenging profession that focuses on the most sensitive part of the body and the site of the two most common infections. And it does all of that, and it tries to solve those problems while the patient is still awake, while the patient is still breathing and swallowing. And this is a really sensitive part of the body. And the degree of accuracy that a dentist works with is measured in microns, like 10 to 20 microns. Now, the thickness of a hair is about 20 microns. So we are dealing as dentists with minutiae and stress, both from the patient and from the dentist and from the dental nurse all the time. And so this is an incredibly intense, and we're dealing with an epidemic in tooth decay and gum disease. So it's easy to get lost in the mouth, and it's a really tough gig. And I do think dentistry is now much, much, much more holistic than it ever was before. And that's because there is so much research linking gum disease to every other disease, from mental health, cardiovascular disease, cancer, fertility, low birth weight in children, erectile dysfunction, that gets men's attention, a whole range of things. Why? Because chronic inflammation is the common denominator, and the most common site of chronic inflammation is the gums and the teeth. And so, the holistic connection is happening in dentistry, but it's a really intense and challenging job. And I think dentists actually, there are things I do and don't love about what dentists say in a public health space, but by and large, I think we do an incredible job, and we are moving into a far more holistic viewpoint, whether a dentist likes it or not. It's just happening.
Brilliant.
Good to hear. There's just so much.
I know. My head's going.
I keep thinking, okay, we haven't talked about breath. We haven't talked about snoring, sleep. We haven't talked about the quantum health that you just kind of mentioned and threw over there. But we're at the end of our hour, and maybe we'll get you back, Ron.
I'd love to.
Well, yeah,
Anytime.
I think
could we go there a little bit about about the breath, because this seems to be such a massive issue, Ron, for so many people with sleep and our breath and our ability to actually look after ourselves. There is so much focus on breath work. Could you just perhaps touch on that? I hope you don't mind, Cyndi. I just think it's such an important part. And Ron, you just explained this so brilliantly.
Look, breathing, well, I thought sleep and breathe are foundational, and I still think they are. And we can do another program on quantum biology. But here's the thing. The secret to living a long life is to keep breathing for as long as you can. That's not particularly a big breakthrough, I know, but there's another thing to be said about that. The secret to living a healthy long life is to breathe well for as long as you can. And there's a big difference between just breathing and breathing well. And there are 3 or 4 things that define breathing well. First and foremost, breathing through your nose. That is so important. Your nose warm, humidifies and filters the air before you take it into your lungs. So that's important. It also produces, when you breathe that through your nose, it produces something called nitric oxide. Nitric oxide is one of the most important regulators in the body, and it also happens to be antimicrobial, which in this day and age, antimicrobial, which means antibacterial and antiviral, is pretty important. So 60% of the body's nitric oxide is produced in the paranasal sinuses, only when you breathe through your nose. When you breathe through your mouth, it doesn't happen. So breathing through your nose is important for many, many reasons. If you've got a set of lungs, why not use all of it? So breathing from the diaphragm is really important, diaphragmatic breathing. And that has implications not only on your using all of your lungs, but it also, as that muscle, and the diaphragm is that muscle that sits between your chest cavity and between your abdominal cavity. It's sort of a sheath of muscle that moves the lungs in and out, right? That stimulates your internal organs, and it also improves pelvic floor muscles, which, hey, after you've had a kid or as we all get older, who doesn't want better pelvic floor muscles? So breathe through the nose, use your diaphragm so you use all of your lungs, and breathe slowly and gently. Now, that's not only important during the day, but it's particularly important at night, because a consistently good night's sleep is a function of quantity, which means for 90% of us getting 7 to 9 hours of sleep a night. But putting your head on the pillow isn't enough. You've got to breathe well while you're asleep. And breathing well while you're asleep does not mean snoring, does not mean stopping breathing. People actually stop breathing while they sleep. It's called an apnea, and why obstructive sleep apnea is such a problem. So a consistently good night's sleep affects every measure of physical, mental, and emotional health. So that's it in a nutshell, why sleeping and breathing are so important.
Wow. I think we both started breathing really much better as you were speaking. It's amazing. It's something that's so unconscious. Not many of us think about having to breathe, thankfully. And yet when someone talks about breath, we become even more aware of it. And there's some brilliant books out there. I remember Breath with James Nestor and the taping of the mouth, and just the studies he did in that on himself, using himself as the guinea pig. And all his markers changed remarkably after 10 days of mouth breathing. From a final point of view, Ron, the Up for a Chat listener is curious, they're inquisitive, they want to know what's next, and they are on the cutting edge of all this information. What would be your message with all of your knowledge right here, right now? What would be a final message you would say to our beautiful listener in regards to their own well-being?
Look, this is probably preaching to the converted, because your listeners are already tuned into this. But, I think about what is the meaning of life? May as well just leave them with that. And, to me, the meaning of life is to fulfill your potential. And in order to fulfill your potential, being in good health is a pretty good place to be. So whatever fulfilling your potential means, being the best husband, wife, father, mother, daughter, member of the community, doctor, whatever you want to be, whatever that means to you, fulfilling your potential, health is the most important part of that. And your health is just too important to leave to anybody else. So taking control of your own health is number one in order to be the best we can be. So that would be my parting message.
Oh, I love it. Absolutely love it. If there is a business that is listening, where would they go to be part of your improving business health community? Where would we go for that?
It's on unstresshealth.com. That's all one word, lowercase, unstress, which is a made-up word, unstresshealth, all one word, .com. They'll find it there, or my website, drronehrlich.com, would lead them there. But unstresshealth.com is where it's all starting to happen. And, as I said, when I grow up, that's what I want to do, transform global health.
I love that you've been in clinical practice 45 years and you're saying, when I grow up, this is what I want to do. I find that people who love what they do, they can't get enough of it. And it sounds like that your love of what you have been doing for 45 years is just shining through. And on behalf of Kim, unless Kim, you have something else to say.
Oh, no, I just think # we have a crush on you. And thank you.
I just think, that your passion and your love has helped like thousands and thousands, of people to find health. And it sounds like you're going to be going another 45 years to help more and more people find that health. And I love that you're doing it at a business level, because like I know in my business, Ron, the amount, like yesterday I got all these messages from my managing director saying, so-and-so is away sick, so-and-so is away sick, so-and-so is away sick. Now that we're in a health industry, my team know what to do, yet we are losing, lost productivity as a result of this. So it's got to be more than just nutrition, because that's what we talk about is just nutrition. And I just love that you're doing this in a holistic way. And I look forward to, spreading the word about what you're doing. And I want to thank you on behalf of Kim and I for spending this hour with us. And we will get you back, because I do want to talk about the quantum part of this healing. I'm learning more and more about it, but I don't know enough. So I figured you're going to be the one I'll be asking the question to learn more about that. So thank you, Ron, on behalf of Kim and I.
Thank you so much for having me.
You're amazing.
This has been a production of TheWellnessCouch.com. Check us out on Facebook and join in the conversation on Facebook.com/TheWellnessCouch. Subscribe to each show on iTunes and check us out on Twitter. The Wellness Couch, streaming wellness into your lives.
Whilst the Wellness Couch presenter endeavor to provide accurate and helpful information to their listeners, these podcasts cannot take into account individual circumstances and are not intended to be a substitute for health and medical advice from a qualified health professional. You should always seek the advice of a qualified health professional before acting on any of the information provided by any of the Wellness Couch podcasts.